Over the last 16 years, we at the Arab American Institute have been engaged in a number of studies in an effort to better understand our community. We've done demographic work using the U.S. Census data to both understand Arab Americans, their income, their education, and their employment, but also to understand where they live and how they contribute to the communities in which they live. We've done, at the same time, polling of Arab American attitudes using registered voter lists in order to understand how Arab Americans identify themselves, how Arab Americans politically situate themselves in the American political spectrum, and how they vote and how they feel about the issues facing the country today. We've done this both to know who we are, where we live, and what we believe, but also to deal with the myths and misunderstandings that people in the larger society have about Arab Americans. It's a problem we've had to contend with now for many decades. And what better way to do that than hard data derived from the census, but also from the opinion polling that we've been able to, and been fortunate enough to be able to conduct. Our first demographic study was published in 1990, done by my brother John Zogby. It was called Arab Americans Today, and using U.S. Census data, it developed a picture of Arab Americans, their income levels, their employment, where they live, and the size of their families, etc. And it was a fascinating picture of the community that emerged. A community that had an income level higher than the median in American society, had education level, one of the highest education levels of any community in the country. And a picture overall of Arab Americans that was quite successful. At the same time, every 2 years now, since the late 1990s, we have been polling Arab American attitudes. Here's what we found in our most recent poll. We found, number one, that Arab Americans remain extremely proud of their ethnicity and their heritage. This is important because numbers that we found back in the late 1990s indicated a very high level of pride in heritage, in the 90% range, high 80s to 90% range, despite more than a decade now of anti-Arab and anti-Muslim hysteria in the country, beginning with 9/11 but continuing on since then. Despite all of this, Arab Americans retain a pride in their ethnicity and heritage. In the most recent poll, 87% said that they were proud of their ethnic origin, and 63% say that they identify themselves as Arab American. Now, back when we began polling in the late 1990s, only 43% identified as Arab American. But the growth of this self-identification indicates that a community sense has emerged, a community sense that is growing and is extremely proud of its ethnicity and heritage. This is important because despite growing discrimination and the perception of discrimination, Arab Americans still want to self-identify as Arab American. Back when we first asked the discrimination questions after 9/11, receiving a grant from the Soros Foundation that wanted to know how Arab Americans were being impacted by the backlash following 9/11, we found then that 30% said that they were discriminated against. We did that poll in every 6 months for 2 years. We were funded to do that by the Soros people. And the average at that point was about 30% said in each of the polls that we did that they had experienced some level of discrimination because of their heritage. In the most recent poll, that number has climbed to 43%, a worrisome trend. But it's interesting to note that despite that growth in perception of discrimination, there's a similar growth in almost a defiant growth in the self-identification as Arab American. People aren't running away from it, they're embracing it. On the political side, let's take a look at that. From 1996 to 2000, Arab Americans largely identified themselves as Democrat, but with a slight edge over the Republicans, like a 2-point edge, 38% Democrat, 36% Republican, or 40% Democrat, 38% Republican. In the 2002 election, that was the number, 40 to 38. By 2002, the range began to grow, the gap began to grow to an 8% gap. as the Bush policies toward Iraq, toward civil liberties, toward the kind of the backlash language that was used by some in the Republican Party against Arabs and Muslims continued to accelerate, that gap grew even wider. It grew from 8% in the next couple of years to where it is today, almost 2-to-1 Arab Americans identifying as Democrat instead of Republican. In the most recent poll, 44% say that they're Democrat, and only 23% say that they're Republican. In 2012, 65% said, when we asked in this poll, who did you vote for in 2012? 65% said that they voted for Barack Obama. Only 25% said that they voted for Mitt Romney. That's about the number that we got in 2012 at the time of the election. And so people have maintained exactly today what they say that they did back then. Which is unusual in most elections. As the election fades and people develop different feelings about the candidate that they once voted for, they kind of disown their vote. Arab Americans aren't disowning their vote, but nevertheless, they are displeased with the president. They give him a 38% job approval rating as opposed to a 59% negative job approval rating. That's a little lower than the American public as a whole. At the same time, they only give Congress a 13% job rating, and 55%, a majority, say that the country is moving in the wrong direction. Now that's interesting. Disapproval for the president, disapproval for Congress, strong feeling the country is moving in the wrong direction. But when we ask Arab Americans what we call the Reagan question, the middle class question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, or in this particular iteration, do you think your children are going to be better off in the future? What we find is that 2/3 say that they believe that their children are going to be better off in the future. Now that is in exact contrast to where most Americans are, where only 1/3 of Americans say that their children will be better off. That sense of optimism in the future has diminished among most Americans, but among Arab Americans, 2/3 say that they're optimistic about the future. What are the most important issues facing America today, Arab Americans today? And how do they feel that the country, what do they feel are the most important issues facing the country? By far, the top issue remains the economy. It's been in every poll we've done. Jobs in the economy are number one. Foreign policy is number two. Healthcare and education are number 3 and 4. These 4 issues far and away are the top issues of concern. And on every single one of them, with the exception of foreign policy, Arab Americans feel Democrats would do a better job than Republicans by a margin of 2-to-1. On the next tier, the issues are immigration, budget, taxes, and terrorism. And here too, with the exception of terrorism, Democrats win the confidence of Arab Americans by 2-to-1. Interesting, on the issues of foreign policy and the issues of terrorism and national security, Arab Americans of both Democrat and Republican affiliation feel neither party does a good job, and they feel overall that the country is not adequately handling either of those issues. So what we find in the end is an Arab American community that is self-aware, is proud of its heritage, feels that America is in trouble and moving in the wrong direction, but they're confident about their future, and they are paying attention to the issues of the day, and have strong feelings about which party and which candidates can do the best job. 2-to-1 Democrat, and that's pretty much across the board and consistent with the polling that we found in the last 3 election cycles. Any further information you want, you can find it on our website, and the poll in full is available there. Thank you.